Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share, and restack buttons. Well, this hasn't happened since Germany in the 1930s. What am I talking about? Well, according to one expert, we're witnessing the largest military buildup of this magnitude since Nazi Germany in the 1930s. So, in this video, we're going to talk about what's happening and ask the question, is this really like the 1930s? Is this really an apt comparison? We're going to talk about, if it is, what is the purpose? What's the end game that's in mind? And then we're going to talk about what's likely to happen next. So let's dive right in, starting with this. This is from the Federalist. It says, report, China rapidly builds up weapons and psychological warfare operations. This is by Chuck DeVore from back in December. And he says, China's military buildup and cognitive warfare strategy are clear indications of its intent to defeat the U.S. and its allies by any means necessary. He says, the People's Republic of China is undertaking an unprecedented military buildup aimed at challenging America and its allies, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. And, like Nazi Germany's buildup in the 1930s, the militarization program ordered by the Chinese Communist Party isn't simply a great power buildup. It's a weapon in service of a deadly ideology. It says the 2024 Department of Defense China Military Power Report and recent analysis by Bill Gertz in the Washington Times revealed this buildup as part of a broader strategy by the Chinese Communist Party to position itself as a global superpower. Meanwhile, the U.S., having spent $5.4 trillion on the global war on terror and the attendant feudal nation building, has left itself strategically vulnerable by diverting critical resources while underestimating the threat from China. He says, missile expansion and strategic modernization. China has rapidly expanded the People's Liberation Army rocket force arsenal, adding that we know of some 50 new intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of striking the continental U.S. for a cumulative total of 400, 300 medium-range ballistic missiles and 100 long-range cruise missiles, more than 600 operational nuclear warheads projected to surpass 1,000 by 2030, hypersonic missiles like the DF-27 capable of evading U.S. missile defenses and targeting Guam, Hawaii, and Alaska, and China's Navy, already the largest in the world with 370 ships and submarines, is expected to grow to 435 by 2030. So we're definitely seeing a buildup in many of these post-World War II conventional areas of military power. But as we've talked about before, the present and the future of warfare is drone warfare. And drone warfare in coordination with these emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and molecular manufacturing will ultimately overturn mutual assured destruction. So until a nation gains that capability, I wouldn't necessarily equate it to the threat that Nazi Germany posed to the world in the 1930s. But this is something that should be an area of concern. And is it like the 1930s in other ways? Well, maybe you think so. Leave your comments below. Let me know what you think. But as for what I think, well, history doesn't repeat itself, but often history rhymes. And we see these cycles, we see very similar patterns repeat themselves throughout history. And so we're seeing that in many ways in China today, a reflection of the 1930s and across the world. So I want to take a look at this right here. This is from Finance Nerd on X. John Haller sent this to me over the weekend, and I thought it was applicable to what we're going to talk about today because it directly speaks to China's economic situation, which we talked about in a video last week. But I think this has, these two fit together. So let's read this, then we'll connect the dots. It says, China's ghost cities are a modern mystery. Entire cities built with no residents. Billions spent on empty skyscrapers and malls. Why did this happen? And what does it reveal about the dangers of speculative growth? Here's the story behind China's economic bubbles. A ghost city is an urban area built with full infrastructure, apartments, offices, malls, and highways, but almost no residents or businesses. These cities were built because, one, government growth targets. China's local governments were incentivized to show GDP growth. Building massive infrastructure projects boost economic numbers, even if nobody lives there. And guys, we've seen similar patterns to this in the past. Remember, after the bubble in real estate and stocks burst in Japan in 1989, if you recall, if you're as old as I am, again, I remember in the early 90s reading all these news stories about Japan building bridges to nowhere. So they engaged in all the spending on infrastructure projects that had no other meaning other than to try to create jobs and boost economic growth. And so we've been seeing that in China now for a couple of decades at least, if not longer. And now they're paying the price for that. It says, 2, real estate is an investment. In China, owning real estate is, I would change that to, was seen as a safe investment. But instead of being primary residences, many properties in ghost cities were bought by speculative investors and left empty. So we saw many Chinese citizens, they bought these apartments, they bought this real estate, or they saved up and put a claim on an apartment yet to be built, and they engaged in speculation in these areas, figuring the prices would continue to go up. This is going to be my retirement, and this is how I'll live toward the end of my life, is based on this real estate. And then 2021 came along, and there was a big real estate bust. We've since seen the failure of the 2 largest property developers in China, their bankruptcy, and we've seen free-falling prices in the Chinese real estate market that has destroyed this idea that investing in Chinese real estate is a great a vehicle to retirement. It says 3, urbanization boom. China anticipated hundreds of millions of rural citizens migrating to cities. To prepare, they built new cities to accommodate the influx, but migration didn't happen as expected in many regions. By 2021, reports indicated that China had 65 million vacant homes, enough to house the entire population of France. Some experts estimated that China's ghost cities could accommodate 30 million people. What went wrong? Well, 1, speculation. Real estate prices soared as investors bet that property values would keep rising. This created a bubble where prices no longer reflected real demand. And again, if you're the same age I am or a little bit older, you've seen this pattern repeat in things like the dot-com bubble, the subprime residential real estate bubble. So that's what we're talking about here. It says debt-driven construction. Local governments and real estate developers took on massive debt to finance these projects. The assumption was that future growth would pay off the debt, but when demand didn't materialize, they were left with unpaid loans and unfinished projects. And again, we see 2021 as the critical year when this decline started to take hold. 3, policy mismanagement. Infrastructure projects were often approved to meet government targets rather than based on actual market demand. This led to a misallocation of resources. So, guys, that's what happens when you have a centrally planned economy, as China does. You end up with a misallocation of resources, and it leads to this type of economic calamity. But guys, that's happening all over the world as well. Here in the United States, we also have a centrally planned economy. Now, I know many people would say, oh, no, the United States is free. It's a capitalist economy. No, the United States has not been a free capitalist economy in over 100 years. Once the Federal Reserve Bank was created, what that did was it led to a group of central planners. So we hear about the Fed. Everybody waits around to hear, is the Fed going to raise rates? Are they going to lower rates? Are they going to talk things up? Are they going to talk things down? What sentence in a paragraph is there? That is the very definition of central planning regarding U.S. currency or the U.S. dollar. That's half of all the transactions in the economy. So by default, just having a central bank means half your economy is centrally planned. Then we have aspects like healthcare, where there's intense government regulation, and other areas, plenty of government jobs, government spending. So more than half of the US economy is centrally planned, and we're seeing those same misallocation of resources here as well. This goes on, it says, China's ghost cities are a warning for the world. The US housing crash of 2008 and Japan's real estate bubble of the 1990s share parallels. When asset prices rise too quickly, fueled by speculation and debt, the correction can be severe. And guys, that's exactly what we're seeing. Over $18 trillion in real estate value has been wiped off the books in China since 2021, according to Barclays. That compares to $12.5 trillion in the United States during the Great Financial Crisis as a result of the residential real estate bubble bursting. So you should expect a very similar circumstance to be playing out in China. That's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing this deflationary spiral. So why do I bring this up? What in the world does this have to do with the largest military buildup, or at least what's claimed to be the largest military buildup since Germany in the 1930s? Well, it has this to do with it. This is parallels to the 1930s that we are seeing. So again, if you think back to the 1930s and the lead up to that, we had the 1920s. 1920s were known as the Roaring Twenties. So what did we see there? Well, we saw central bank debt-fueled speculation in the markets and the economic health all around the world. And we saw everything's great. The stock market's going up. Real estate values are going up. We saw these bubbles. We're seeing the same things here in the United States right now. We talked last week about how overvalued the U.S. stock market is relative to history, relative to the world's other stock markets. We've talked about the bubble that's taking place in the cryptocurrency markets, where you have joke meme coins worth billions or tens of billions of dollars when they should be worth zero. And so we see this speculative bubble. It's popped in China. Soon will pop in the United States. That's what history tells us. Exactly when that will happen, I don't know. But in the 1930s, we saw this exact same thing leading up to that. And then we saw the Great Depression. So what happens when that debt bubble burst is you have what's called a deflationary spiral. It shrinks the currency supply, makes that currency harder to come by. It makes it harder to service all of this mountain of debt that individuals have taken on and businesses have taken on, municipalities have taken on, and even nation states themselves have taken on. And it feeds on itself. It causes this huge economic contraction. Again, we're seeing that in China. We're seeing that take place in Germany. We're going to see it be taking place in the United States in the very near future. What else did we see in the 1930s? Well, we saw tariffs and trade barriers being erected all around the world. We saw the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act come into being in 1930. Many people believe that exacerbated the problems of the Great Depression, made that last longer than it otherwise would have. In response to that act, in which the United States raised tariffs on thousands of imported goods, other nations followed suit, and they raised tariffs on imported American products. And so every nation turned inward as they tried to protect the jobs of their domestic population. The problem is when you do that, you actually hurt the domestic population. It often leads to job losses of people who are involved in those products being imported. Then it raises prices internally for people who have to rely on other less efficiently created products. It causes its own problems. We've been seeing these trade barriers come up over the last several years, and especially with the incoming Trump administration. That's an area that President Trump is focused on. Other nations are claiming they're going to follow suit. So we'll see how that plays out. But again, all of this looks like a very similar pattern and cycle to what we saw in the 1930s. And then, of course, as you have an economic slowdown, especially akin to what we saw in the Great Depression, many governments, many nations will turn outward to war and conquest as a result of that. Why? Because if you are looking at a threat of losing power, as your population becomes unemployed, they become hungry, and they start looking for someone to blame, they're going to look rightfully to the people in power. So those people in power, in order to distract their population and prevent revolution, are going to say, well, it's not our fault, it's these people over here who are the enemy. Let's all rally together to take on this enemy. And then they begin invading and carrying out war, engaging in conquest, and hoping that that will fix the problems at home, help consolidate their power. So that's what we saw in the 1930s. Are we going to see the same thing right now? Well, I think, yeah, that's probably what's next. Why would China engage in this massive military buildup if they're not going to use it? Well, it could be that similar to the ghost cities, they're fueling this military spending in order to try to supercharge their economy, keep people working, and that they don't intend to use it. But it's very real possibility that they intend to expand their influence, at least in the Pacific area, through conquest of Taiwan or the Philippines, or who knows what other territories or countries they could target. Again, this is a conventional military buildup that this article talked about. The present and the future of military warfare is in the drone space. It is built on a foundation of AI, quantum computing, and ultimately molecular manufacturing, which will give whoever acquires it complete control over the entire Earth. So we're not talking about, I believe, the same threat level that Nazi Germany posed in the 1930s until we encounter a nation that actually has those capabilities. So it really depends on this big military buildup. What are they spending it on? You can have the largest navy. I can make a bunch of paper boats, float them in the water, and say I have a navy of 10,000 ships. But that doesn't mean that those assets are equal in power to my adversary's assets. So it really depends on the quality of what we're talking about. Are these assets going to be launching swarms of drones, or are they launching outdated conventional military hardware? There's a big difference between those, and we'll have to see how this all plays out. But guys, this is concerning because, again, this is we're seeing a replay, a pattern that we saw in the 1930s. And that resulted in global war. The Bible tells us there will be a World War III, even though the conventional wisdom says there's not going to be a World War III. Major powers won't go to war with each other because it will end in complete destruction, mutual assured destruction. But we've talked about this numerous times. That is not actually the case. Mutual assured destruction has a shelf life. It will become obsolete as we see AI and quantum computing continue to grow exponentially and mature, but also as we see molecular manufacturing come onto the scene, which frankly I don't think we will see. I think that's a tribulation event. Because when we see molecular manufacturing appear, or the world sees that, they'll find out when whoever acquires it uses it to conquer the entire globe. So yes, we're heading into the greatest financial and economic crisis the world has ever seen. It's going to have repercussions for the entire globe. At the end of this, I expect to see war. And World War III, and we read about that in Revelation chapter 6. At the end of that war, there will be a great devastation, but the human race will still be here. The Bible doesn't say the human race is destroyed in World War III or in a war with each other, with other humans. So we would expect to see that, and we would expect to see, in the aftermath of that war, a global empire with the Antichrist standing astride of that global empire. So guys, that's what's coming. That's what we see in the near future. How far away is all of this? I don't know, but we're seeing these patterns emerge, and it would be irresponsible to not take note of these patterns and say, this is what happened back in the 1920s and 30s. We're seeing the same things happen here. Does that mean that the 1940s follow in a world war again? So I think the answer is yes, but maybe you disagree. If so, leave your comments below. And God willing, I'll see you on Wednesday.